The throne hall did not overwhelm the senses. It subdued them. Light was present but restrained, filtered through high, narrow apertures that refused to reveal their source. The ceiling rose far beyond practical necessity, not to impress, but to remind anyone standing beneath it that scale here was not designed for comfort. The floor absorbed sound rather than reflecting it, turning footsteps into muted confirmations of presence instead of announcements. I was acutely aware of my own breathing, not because it was loud, because it felt noticeable. The alien queen sat at the center of the hall, her form framed by architecture that seemed to defer to her rather than support her. She did not sit rigidly. She did not pose. Her stillness was not the stillness of restraint, but of certainty, like something that had never needed to hurry. Her skin carried a pale, even tone, unmarred by ornamentation. Her long, elegant ears swept back naturally, neither hidden nor emphasized. They were simply part of her, as unremarkable to her people as my hands were to me. She looked at me, not with curiosity, with assessment already completed. "You will stand beside my daughter," she said. Her voice was calm, unraised, final. "And tomorrow you will do so before this court." The words settled into the space between us without echo. They did not demand reaction. They assumed compliance, the way gravity assumes you will fall if you step too far. My body responded before my mind did. It stopped, not in fear, in interruption. The command had cut across my internal rhythm so cleanly that motion itself seemed temporarily irrelevant. I did not kneel. I did not speak. I did not even shift my weight. I simply remained where I was, as if time had paused me mid-thought. Around us, no one reacted. That was when I understood something was wrong. No gasps, no murmurs, no shock. The court remained perfectly composed, eyes forward, expressions neutral. This was not an announcement meant to surprise them. This was something they had anticipated, perhaps not in detail but in direction. I forced my lungs to work again. "Your Majesty," I said carefully, hearing the thinness in my own voice despite my effort to control it, "I believe there may be a misunderstanding." The Queen inclined her head slightly, not in agreement, in acknowledgement of sound. "There is no misunderstanding," she replied. "My daughter has observed you, she has chosen." Chosen. The word carried weight here, not emotional weight, structural weight. It felt as though a decision had just locked into place somewhere far above me, reshaping priorities I could not see. I felt smaller, not because I was intimidated, but because I was suddenly aware of how many layers of consequence existed beyond my understanding. "With respect," I said, slowing my speech deliberately, "I do not know your daughter." A ripple moved through the hall, not offense, not anger, interest. The Queen's gaze sharpened, not with hostility but with something closer to confirmation. "She knows you," the Queen said. "That is sufficient." My mind reached backward, searching memory with new urgency. The palace maintenance corridor, the failed energy conduit, the quiet figure standing just far enough away not to interfere. I remembered speaking without deference because I believed it unnecessary. I remembered explaining a repair instead of performing it theatrically. I remembered thinking she was simply observant. I had not known she was listening with purpose. "I was not aware of her position," I said. "That," the Queen replied, "is precisely why the observation continued." The meaning settled slowly, like sediment in still water. "You did not behave as though advantage were present," she continued. "You did not adjust your tone. You did not attempt relevance." "I was doing my job," I said. "Yes," the Queen replied. "And you did not make it about yourself." Silence followed, not uncomfortable silence, deliberate silence. I felt every eye in the chamber on me now, not as a curiosity but as a variable being recalculated in real time. "What does stand beside mean?" I asked. The question hung in the air longer than my previous words had. This one mattered. The Queen considered me for a moment before answering. "It means alignment," she said. "Visibility, confirmation. When my daughter speaks, your presence will indicate balance." "I don't understand," I admitted. "That is acceptable," she replied evenly. "Understanding is not required immediately." "And if I decline?" I asked. The temperature of the room did not change. The asterisk weight asterisk of it did. The Queen did not move, but something in the hall tightened as if unseen systems had paused, waiting for her response. Then she said calmly, "My daughter will be disappointed." No threat followed, no consequence listed, just disappointment. And I understood with unsettling clarity that disappointment here carried more power than anger ever could. At the edge of my vision, movement drew my attention. She stood among the attendants now, the princess. Still, watching, our eyes met. There was no triumph in her gaze, no anticipation, only certainty. And in that moment, standing beneath a ceiling built to diminish me, I realized the truth I had been circling since the cafeteria encounter weeks before. This was never about marriage. This was about asterisk position asterisk asterisk. And without intending to, without planning to, without even recognizing the moment it happened, I had stepped into it. I remained standing longer than etiquette allowed, longer than instinct advised. The hall did not rush me. It waited. That, I was learning, was how power behaved here. It did not press. It did not repeat itself. It allowed silence to do the work that force never could. I felt the court's attention settle into me, not as pressure but as expectation, an unspoken assumption that I would eventually find the correct shape to fit into. I inhaled slowly, then exhaled. "Your Majesty," I said, and this time my voice did not tremble, "you are asking me to occupy a position I did not seek." The Queen regarded me with the same calm she had offered from the beginning. If she was offended, she did not dignify it by showing me. "I am not asking," she replied. "I am informing you." That distinction mattered. "I am human," I continued. "I have no standing here, no lineage, no authority." "You have restraint," she said. "You have demonstrated it repeatedly." "I repaired a conduit," I said. "You repaired it without witnesses," the Queen replied. "You spoke without embellishment. You accepted correction without defensiveness. You departed without expectation of recognition." She paused. "These are not common traits." A quiet murmur moved through the far ranks of the court, subtle enough to be almost imagined. I wondered how many of them had spent their lives mastering influence, only to watch it settle, unexpectedly, on someone who had never pursued it. I shifted my weight slightly, the first physical movement I had made since entering the hall. The sound of my boot against the stone floor seemed louder than it should have been. "What does your daughter want?" I asked. This time the Queen did not answer immediately. Her gaze drifted, not away from me but inward, as if consulting something beyond the present moment. When she spoke, her tone was unchanged, but the cadence slowed. "She wants equilibrium," the Queen said. "She has been raised among those who mistake dominance for stability. She has learned better." I frowned. "And I'm what, a symbol?" The Queen's eyes returned to me fully now. "You are a counterweight." The words settled uneasily in my chest. "You stand outside our hierarchies," she continued. "You are not bound by our rivalries, our histories, or our ambitions. When my daughter stands beside you, her decisions cannot be dismissed as internal maneuvering. They will be observed." "By whom?" "By everyone who matters," she replied. I glanced around the hall again, seeing it differently now. Not as a place of spectacle, but as a chamber where futures were quietly sorted, where alignment mattered more than loyalty and restraint carried more authority than aggression. "And if I fail?" I asked. The question escaped before I could stop it. The Queen did not rebuke me for it. She did not reassure me either. Then you will be replaced, she said plainly. There was no cruelty in the statement, no threat, just fact. And the disappointment, I asked. Her gaze flicked briefly, only briefly, toward her daughter. That, she said, would be regrettable. I followed her glance. The princess stood exactly where she had been before, posture straight, hands folded loosely in front of her. She had not moved closer. She had not attempted to signal me. Her presence was patient rather than demanding, her attention focused without being invasive. When our eyes met again, something shifted. Not certainty this time. Curiosity. Not the idle kind. The careful, evaluating curiosity of someone deciding whether a structure was sound enough to lean on. I realized then that she had not chosen me because I was exceptional. She had chosen me because I was predictable in one specific way. I would not perform. You're assuming I'll agree, I said quietly. The queen inclined her head by the smallest fraction. No, she replied, I am assuming you will consider. That was accurate. I need time, I said. The court stiffened almost imperceptibly. Time was a resource here and I had just requested it. The queen considered me once more. Then she nodded. You have until the next cycle, she said. Tomorrow. Of course. And during that time, I asked. You will not be confined, she replied. You will not be persuaded, you will not be threatened. I raised an eyebrow. That's generous. It is strategic, she corrected. She leaned back slightly, a subtle signal. The hall responded immediately. The tension loosened. Systems resumed their quiet hum. The court's attention fractured, some of it drifting away, some of it lingering on me with renewed interest. The audience was over. As attendants moved to escort me out, the princess stepped forward, just one pace. Not enough to break protocol, enough to matter. You may ask me questions, she said softly. Not asterisk now asterisk. Not asterisk here asterisk. Just permission. I nodded once. It was all I trusted myself to do. As I was guided from the hall, I felt the weight of the space lift gradually, like pressure equalizing after a long descent. My thoughts, however, did not follow. They stayed behind. Tomorrow. The word echoed with layered meanings now. Not a deadline, a convergence. I did not know whether I would accept. I did know that declining would not return me to who I had been before. The corridor outside the throne hall felt narrower than it had on my way in. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I walked slowly, letting the rhythm of my steps anchor me, replaying every word, every pause, every deliberate omission. Stand beside. Not kneel, not submit, beside. For the first time since this began, the thought did not feel entirely like a sentence. It felt like a question. And I was not yet certain. The quarters they assigned me were quiet in the way only intentional quiet could be. Not the absence of sound, but the careful placement of it. A low, steady hum beneath the floor. Air circulation tuned to a rhythm that discouraged restlessness. Light that never quite brightened or dimmed enough to suggest a time of day. The room was not meant to comfort me. It was meant to keep me balanced. I stood just inside the doorway for a long moment, hands at my sides, listening. Nothing pressed, nothing invited. That unsettled me more than guards would have. I moved farther in, each step measured, as if the room might react if I hurried. There was a narrow seating alcove facing a wide viewport, the glass polarized to reveal a slow drift of stars beyond the palace's outer shell. No traffic lanes, no passing vessels. Just distance arranged to look infinite without actually being so. I sat. The seat adjusted beneath me, subtle enough to feel like coincidence. I let my shoulders drop. Only then did I realize how tense I had been since entering the hall, how my body had been holding itself in readiness for something dramatic that had never come. Tomorrow. The word returned again, uninvited. Stand beside. Not kneel. Not follow, not serve, beside. I exhaled slowly and leaned back, letting my gaze rest on the stars. They did not shimmer theatrically. They simply existed, distant and indifferent, and for the first time since the Queen spoke, I felt a faint sense of normalcy creep back in. Space was space, distance was distance. Some things, at least, refused to care about politics. A soft tone sounded behind me. I turned. She stood just inside the doorway, having entered without noise or announcement. The princess. Up close, the resemblance to her mother was unmistakable, not in features so much as in bearing. The same composed posture, the same economy of movement. Her long ears swept back gently along her hair, catching the ambient light without drawing attention to themselves. She did not cross the room, she waited. "You said I could ask questions," I said. "Yes," she replied. Her voice was calm but younger than the Queen's, less settled, more open to adjustment. "If you wished." "I do," I said. "I just don't know where to start." "That is acceptable," she said. "Beginnings are often inefficient." I huffed a quiet laugh before I could stop myself. It surprised both of us. Her expression shifted, not into a smile but into something curious, as if she were cataloging the sound for later reference. "Why me?" I asked at last. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she moved closer, stopping at a distance that felt deliberate. Not intimate, not formal, chosen. "You have already asked that question," she said gently, "to my mother." I didn't get a straight answer. "You were not meant to," she replied. I frowned. "That's not reassuring." "No," she agreed, "but it is honest." She turned her gaze toward the viewport, following my line of sight. For a moment we stood in parallel silence, two figures looking outward at something neither of us controlled. "You noticed me," she said finally. I glanced at her. "You were standing in the middle of a malfunctioning conduit corridor. It would have been strange not to." "You noticed me," she repeated, emphasis subtle but unmistakable. "And then you dismissed the notice as unimportant." "I had work to do," I said. "Yes," she replied. "That is what made it significant." I shifted in my seat, uncomfortable. "People notice royalty all the time." "They notice performance," she said. "Deference, fear, desire, you did none of those things." I thought back to that day. The flickering lights, the exposed relay, the quiet presence at the edge of my awareness. I remembered explaining the repair without simplifying it, without elevating it either. I remembered walking away when it was finished, assuming the interaction had ended. "I didn't think it mattered," I said. Her gaze returned to me. "That," she said softly, "is why it did." Silence settled again, heavier this time, not oppressive, reflective. "You understand what my mother is doing," she continued, "even if you do not agree." "I understand parts of it," I said. "I don't understand why you're willing to go along with it." She considered me, truly considered me, and for the first time I sensed hesitation, not doubt but care. "Because I will not rule alone," she said, "and I will not rule unchecked. That's what advisors are for." She tilted her head. "Advisors have incentives." "And I do." "You have fewer," she replied. "That is the point." I let that sink in. The room felt smaller now, not because it had changed, but because the implications were closing in. "You're using me as a constraint," I said. She nodded. "A visible one." "And if I say something you don't like?" "Then I must consider why," she said, publicly. I stared at her. "That sounds exhausting." "Yes," she agreed. "It is also stabilizing." For the first time since she entered, she allowed herself a small, controlled smile. Power that never resists itself tends to collapse. I looked back out at the stars. Tomorrow no longer felt like a threat, it felt like a fulcrum. "You don't know me very well," I said. "No," she replied, "but I know enough." "That's dangerous." "Yes," she said again, "for both of us." Another pause, longer. I became aware of how evenly she breathed, how present she was without demanding attention. I realized then that she was as aware of the weight of tomorrow as I was, perhaps more so. "If I agree," I said slowly, "nothing about my life goes back to normal." "No," she said, "but it will become clearer." "And if I refuse?" She did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was quieter. "Then the alignment my mother seeks will be found elsewhere." And you? I asked. Her gaze held mine. I will continue, she said, but with fewer constraints. That answer stayed with me long after she turned to leave. At the doorway she paused. You asked earlier what stand beside means, she said. I nodded. It means you are seen, she continued. Not elevated. Not diminished, seen. She inclined her head once, a gesture of respect, not command, and then she was gone, leaving the room exactly as she had found it. I remained seated for a long time, staring at the place where she had stood. Tomorrow was approaching, not as a demand, not as a sentence, as a choice. I stayed where I was long after she left. The room did not change to acknowledge my solitude. The light remained even. The hum beneath the floor kept its patient rhythm. If the quarters were monitoring me, they did so without interference, the way one watches a balancing instrument and waits to see whether it settles on its own. I stood eventually, not because I had decided anything, but because stillness had begun to feel like avoidance. The viewport drew me back. Beyond it, stars drifted with the illusion of randomness that only existed because their deeper order was invisible. I wondered how many decisions like mine, small, uncelebrated, were woven into that order. How many times equilibrium depended not on force, but on someone choosing not to look away. Stand beside. The phrase returned, but differently now, not as an instruction, as a position in space, a place where influence happened simply because someone was present and paying attention. A soft chime sounded. I turned. An attendant waited just inside the threshold, posture precise, eyes carefully neutral. You are permitted movement within the inner ring, they said, if you wish. Not escorted, not confined, permitted. I nodded and stepped past them into the corridor. The palace's inner ring felt older than the hall I had left, less ceremonial, more functional. Walls bore faint marks of revision and repair, evidence of a structure that had adapted rather than replaced itself. The air smelled faintly mineral, filtered through systems designed to last centuries. As I walked, I noticed the absence of guards. Security was present, I could feel it, layered and attentive, but it did not manifest as bodies or weapons. The palace trusted its architecture. It trusted precedent. It trusted alignment. That, I was beginning to understand, was the danger. I passed a recessed alcove where two advisors spoke quietly, their conversation halting the moment they noticed me. Their eyes followed me with measured interest as I continued on, and I wondered how many calculations were being updated with my passing. Not threat assessments, relevance charts. In another corridor, a group of junior officials paused mid-discussion, uncertain whether to acknowledge me. One inclined their head politely. The others followed suit, a fraction of a second too late to look natural. I had become visible. The realization tightened something in my chest, not pride, not fear, but responsibility. Visibility meant interpretation. Every gesture could be read, every silence misread. Standing beside someone powerful did not grant protection from consequence, it multiplied it. I stopped near a tall window overlooking a lower city tier. Unlike the stars, this view showed movement that was immediate and human. Transport lines threading through open plazas, figures crossing illuminated bridges, markets forming temporary geometries of light and sound. Life continuing, indifferent to palace calculus. For a moment, I envied that indifference. Tomorrow, I said quietly, testing the word again. It did not echo. Footsteps approached unhurried, familiar in cadence. I turned before I saw her. The princess stopped beside me, not close enough to intrude, not far enough to disengage. This time she did not wait for permission to speak. You are walking to think, she said. Is it that obvious? To me, she replied, yes. I exhaled through my nose, a half-laugh escaping. I don't know if I'm good at this. She tilted her head slightly. At walking. At being considered, I said. Her gaze followed the movement below us. Few are, she said. Most prefer to be either ignored or celebrated. Consideration occupies an uncomfortable middle. That seems like a bad place to stand, I said. Yes, she agreed, which is why it works. We stood in silence again, but it felt different now, less evaluative, more shared. I became aware of the faint energy field that surrounded her, not visible, not tangible, but present in the way systems responded subtly to her proximity. Doors aligned more smoothly. Ambient noise softened. She noticed my attention. "You feel it," she said. "I do," I admitted, "and I don't like that I do." "That means you will question it," she replied, "which is preferable to enjoying it." I glanced at her. "You don't enjoy it." Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted, acknowledgement without confession. "I endure it," she said, "because someone must." We resumed walking, our steps falling into an unplanned rhythm. "You understand what this will look like," she continued, "to my people, that I'm being elevated." "Yes, and to outsiders, that we are consolidating influence," she said calmly. "That a human presence legitimizes my authority across systems that distrust our internal hierarchies." I grimaced. "So I'm leverage." "You are friction," she corrected. "Leverage amplifies, friction resists." "That's not comforting." "No," she said, "but it is accurate." We reached a narrow bridge spanning an open atrium. Below, light cascaded through layered platforms like a controlled waterfall. She stopped at the midpoint. I stopped with her. "If you stand beside me," she said, "you will slow decisions that would otherwise accelerate. You will force explanation where assumption currently suffices. And if I do," she looked at me then fully, "then speed will be valued over care." The choice crystallized, sharp and clean, not between safety and danger, but between two kinds of risk. "I won't be good at politics," I said. She considered that. "Good," she said finally. "Neither am I." That surprised a laugh out of me, short, incredulous. She watched it with the same careful curiosity as before, as if laughter were a phenomenon worth studying. "You don't know how this ends," I said. "No," she agreed. "I know how it begins." The bridge's far end opened onto another corridor, this one leading back toward my quarters. She slowed, then stopped. "You have until tomorrow," she said, "to decide." I nodded. "I know." She hesitated, only a fraction of a second, but enough to matter. "Whatever you choose," she added, "the alignment will change." "That's comforting," I said dryly. "It is honest," she replied. She inclined her head, the same restrained gesture she had offered before, and turned away, her steps unhurried, her posture unchanged. I watched until the corridor bent and she disappeared from view. I returned to my quarters with my thoughts quieter than they had been all day. Not settled. The morning did not announce itself. There was no change in light, no tonal shift in the palace systems, no subtle cue designed to mark the passage of time. I knew the cycle had advanced only because the hum beneath the floor altered its rhythm, barely perceptible, but enough to register if you were listening for it. I was. I sat upright on the edge of the resting platform, hands clasped loosely, feeling the weight of the decision press closer without quite touching me yet. Tomorrow had become today, and today felt less like a deadline than a narrowing corridor. Not closing, just focusing. Stand beside. The phrase no longer echoed. It waited. I dressed in the garments provided, neutral cut, unadorned fabric, nothing that suggested rank or ceremony. The palace had not attempted to reshape me visually. That, I suspected, was intentional. I was meant to remain legible as myself. Any transformation would come from position, not appearance. When I stepped into the corridor, it was already awake. Attendants moved with quiet efficiency, their paths never intersecting by accident. Information passed in glances, in shifts of posture, in pauses timed precisely enough to communicate without sound. I walked among them as an anomaly they had already accepted, their attention sliding over me without challenge, without warmth. Visibility without interruption. A pair of tall doors stood open at the end of the corridor, revealing a space different from the throne hall, smaller, lower, more intimate. This was not a place of pronouncements. It was a place of preparation. She stood inside, alone. The princess had changed little since I had last seen her. Her posture was the same, upright, composed, but something in her attention had sharpened. Where yesterday she had observed, today she assessed. Not me specifically, everything. "You slept," she said when she noticed me. "I think so," I replied. "Hard to tell here." "That is intentional," she said. "Sleep without markers reduces anticipation." I considered that. "You think about everything." "Yes," she said simply. We stood across from one another in the center of the chamber, the space between us neither formal nor casual. I became aware again of the faint field that followed her presence, not a force, but an influence like pressure normalized so completely it went unnoticed until it shifted. "You have decided," she said. It was not a question. "I have," I replied. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "But I need to understand what happens next." She inclined her head slightly, then asked. I took a breath. "When I stand beside you, what do you expect of me?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she walked to one side of the chamber, where a wide panel of translucent material stretched from floor to ceiling. With a small gesture, she activated it. The panel came alive with motion. Star systems unfolded in layered projection, roots, borders, zones of influence traced in faint lines of light. Some pulsed steadily. Others flickered, unstable. I recognized none of them, yet I understood instinctively what I was looking at. "Balance in motion. These are not maps," she said. "They are pressures." She indicated a cluster where several lines converged too tightly. "Here, authority compresses, decisions are fast, efficient, and brittle." Her hand shifted to another region where lines spread wide, diffuse. "Here, influence dissolves, conflicts linger, nothing breaks quickly but nothing heals either." She turned back to me. "My role is to adjust these tensions, without collapsing the structures that depend on them." "And mine?" I asked. "You will ask why," she said. I frowned. "That's it." "No," she replied. "You will ask why asterisk out loud asterisk asterisk." The distinction mattered. "When decisions are made too quickly," she continued, "your presence will require explanation. When restraint is dismissed as weakness, you will embody its value without declaring it." "That sounds passive," I said. "It is not," she replied calmly. "It is visible resistance." I stared at the shifting lights. "And if I disagree with you?" "Then you will," she said, "and the disagreement will exist. No punishment, no override, just existence." I let that settle. "You're trusting me with influence you can't fully control." "Yes." "Why?" She met my gaze. "Because control that cannot tolerate friction will eventually fail. I intend to rule longer than that." A silence fell between us, different from the silences before. This one felt earned. "Your mother," I said carefully, "she's allowing this." "She initiated it," the princess replied, "but she will not interfere." That surprised me, at all. "She will observe," she said, "as she observed you." I exhaled slowly. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You are not," she said. "Readiness is irrelevant." That should have unsettled me. Instead, it grounded me. A soft chime resonated through the chamber, not loud, not urgent, a signal. "It is time," she said. "For what?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "To be seen," she replied. We walked together toward the far doors, our pace unhurried, our steps not quite synchronized but not out of rhythm either. As the doors opened, a familiar weight pressed in, the gravity of attention, of structure, of expectation. The court awaited, not silent this time. Murmurs moved through the space, restrained but present. Advisors shifted. Dignitaries recalibrated their stances. When the princess stepped forward, the noise thinned, like sound pulled back by an invisible hand. I stepped beside her. Not ahead, not behind, beside. The effect was immediate. I felt it more than saw it. A subtle hesitation rippled through the court. Calculations paused. Assumptions stalled. The system, whatever its scale, registered a variable it had not fully modeled. The queen watched from her throne, her expression unreadable, her posture unchanged. Her gaze moved from her daughter to me and lingered, not with scrutiny but with acknowledgement. This was not approval, it was confirmation. I stood still, resisting the instinct to perform, to signal competence or submission. I let my presence be exactly what it was: human, limited, attentive. For the first time since entering the palace, I understood the magnitude of what I had done. I had not accepted a role. I had introduced uncertainty into a system that depended on certainty. And as the court adjusted around us, I sensed the stars beyond the palace shift, not in direction, not in brilliance, but in relation to one another. Alignment was changing, and this time I was not watching from a distance. I was part of it. The court did not react the way I expected. There was no audible intake of breath, no sudden stillness sweeping the hall like a wave. Instead, the reaction unfolded in layers, subtle enough that I might have missed it if I hadn't already learned how this place communicated. Advisors leaned toward one another by imperceptible degrees. A few dignitaries adjusted their footing, recalculating distance and angle. Several gazes flicked to me, away from me, then back again, quick, controlled movements that suggested mental revisions being made in real time. I had not disrupted ceremony. I had disrupted assumption. The princess did not acknowledge the effect. She stood with the same composure she had shown since the beginning, shoulders relaxed, hands resting loosely at her sides. If she felt the shift, she did not let it change her posture. That, I realized, was part of the design. She was not using me as a shield or a symbol. She was letting the system respond honestly. The queen's voice carried across the hall without amplification. "Proceed." One word, no emphasis. A senior advisor stepped forward, robes whispering softly against the stone. "With respect," they said, inclining their head toward the throne before turning to the princess. "The presence of an external counterparty at this stage introduces variables that have not been modeled." I felt several eyes turn to me again, sharper this time. The princess did not look at the advisor immediately. She kept her gaze forward. "Then the models are incomplete," she said. A pause followed. "Not resistance, evaluation." "And if instability follows?" Another voice asked from the far side of the chamber. "Then it will be visible," she replied. "Which is preferable to instability that is hidden." I felt something settle in my chest at that. Not relief. Recognition. The queen watched the exchange without interruption. Her stillness was not passive. It was supervisory, like a force that intervened only when necessary and never a moment sooner. I understood then that she was not testing her daughter's authority. She was testing its resilience. I became aware of my own stance, feet planted evenly, shoulders level, breathing slow. I resisted the urge to nod in agreement or shift my weight to signal alignment. My role, as the princess had explained, was not to affirm. It was to exist. An advisor closer to the throne turned toward me, expression carefully neutral. "Human," they said. "Do you understand the implications of standing where you stand?" The question was not hostile, it was procedural. "I understand some of them," I replied. My voice sounded louder than I expected in the vast space, but it did not echo. Enough to know that pretending certainty where there isn't any would be dishonest. A ripple moved through the chamber. This time it was unmistakable. The advisor's brow tightened slightly. "You speak freely." "Yes," I said. "I was told that was the point." The princess glanced at me then, just for a moment. There was no surprise in her expression. Only a quiet acknowledgement that I was doing exactly what I had said I would. The queen inclined her head by the smallest fraction. "Continue," she said again. Proceedings resumed, but they did not return to their original rhythm. Proposals were presented with more context than usual. Objections were phrased as questions rather than declarations. When the princess spoke, she did so with the same calm authority. But now, Explanations followed decisions instead of preceding them. I noticed something else. When disagreement arose, eyes turned to me, not for approval, not for endorsement, but for presence. My silence became a factor. When I remained still, the discussion continued. When I shifted just slightly, someone paused. I had not said a word, and yet the tempo of power had changed. Time passed strangely in the hall. I could not tell whether hours had slipped by or mere minutes. Eventually, the flow of discussion slowed, then eased to a close. The last advisor stepped back. The ambient hum of the palace deepened, systems recalibrating around new data. The queen rose. The motion was unhurried, but it commanded attention with an ease that bordered on inevitability. The court fell silent, not because it was ordered to, but because silence was the appropriate response. "My daughter has chosen a path," the queen said, her gaze sweeping the hall. "It is not without risk." Her eyes settled on me, not accusing, not assessing, observing. "She has also chosen transparency," the queen continued. "That choice will be tested. A pause, it will stand." The declaration carried weight far beyond the chamber. I felt it resonate, not physically, but structurally, like a keystone set into place, changing how everything above it would bear weight. The queen turned slightly toward her daughter. "You may proceed." The court dispersed in controlled motion, conversations beginning in low tones, clusters forming and dissolving as calculations continued elsewhere. I remained where I was, uncertain whether I was dismissed or expected to move. The princess solved that uncertainty by stepping forward. "Walk with me," she said quietly. We left the hall together through a side passage, one less ceremonial and more utilitarian. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. The pressure eased. The air felt lighter, less attentive. Only when the doors closed behind us did she exhale. "That went differently," I said. "Yes," she replied, "as intended. You didn't warn me. You were going to let them question me." "I did not know which questions they would ask," she said. "Prepared answers would have reduced their value." I huffed a small laugh. "You're very comfortable with uncertainty." "I am learning to be," she said. We walked in silence for a few moments, our footsteps echoing softly now that the hall's sound-dampening influence had faded. "Are you angry?" she asked suddenly. I considered the question honestly. "No," I said, overwhelmed, a little concerned about my long-term survival, but not angry. She nodded. "Good. That's it." "Yes." We reached a narrow balcony overlooking the palace's exterior gardens, carefully structured spaces where organic growth was allowed only within defined parameters. Streams followed deliberate paths. Trees were pruned into elegant asymmetry. Life shaped without being suffocated. She stopped at the railing. I joined her. "You understand now why I asked you to stand beside me," she said. "I think I'm beginning to," I replied. "You didn't want agreement." "No," she said. "I wanted delay. Delay." She turned to me. "In systems like the days that followed did not resemble an ending. They resembled tension held in careful balance, the kind that does not snap or resolve, but hums quietly beneath everything else." I learned quickly that standing beside the princess was not an act confined to ceremony. It extended into corridors, councils, transit platforms, and pauses that lasted a second longer than expected. Wherever she went, the system adjusted. Wherever I followed, it hesitated. That hesitation became noticeable, not dramatic, not obvious, but real. I began to see it in the smallest places. An advisor who stopped mid-sentence and reconsidered a phrasing. A commander who delayed a fleet repositioning by a single cycle, requesting justification that previously would have been assumed unnecessary. A trade delegate who asked a question aloud instead of burying it in protocol. Each time, eyes flicked toward me, not for approval, not for command, but for confirmation that the pause itself was permitted. I never spoke unless spoken to. When I did, I spoke plainly. That more than anything unsettled them. The princess noticed. "You are consistent," she said one evening as we stood overlooking a transport nexus far below the palace's upper levels. Light traced ordered paths through space, vessels arriving and departing with mechanical precision. "That makes you difficult to manipulate." "I'm not trying to be difficult," I replied. "I know," she said. "That is why it works." Her tone carried no flattery, just assessment. We had fallen into a rhythm by then, one that neither of us had named but both of us respected. She did not consult me on policy. I did not advise her on governance. Instead, I existed within her orbit, a fixed point that altered trajectories without exerting force. The queen observed all of this from a distance. She rarely addressed me directly after the first assembly. When she did, her words were sparse, precise, and free of implication. She never questioned my presence. She never defended it either. The court learned to read that silence as endorsement. One cycle, during a closed session, an advisor finally voiced what had been accumulating beneath the surface. "This arrangement," they said carefully, "has altered decision velocity across multiple sectors. Outcomes are stabilizing, but at the cost of efficiency." The princess did not answer immediately. I waited. The queen waited. Finally, the princess spoke. "Is stability undesirable?" "No," the advisor replied. "But delay can become vulnerability." I felt the familiar pull of attention shift toward me. This time, I did not pretend not to notice it. "Speed without context creates its own vulnerabilities," I said quietly. "You just don't see them until they fail." The advisor frowned. "And you are qualified to assess this." I met their gaze. "I am qualified to question certainty." The room went still, not frozen, focused. The queen inclined her head slightly, the smallest gesture of acknowledgement I had ever received from her. The discussion moved on. Later that night, alone in my quarters, I realized something had changed, not in the palace but in me. I was no longer bracing for removal or consequence. The role had stopped feeling temporary, not permanent either, sustainable. I slept easily. The next day, the princess and I stood together again before the court. Not for announcement, not for display, just presence. The murmurs were fewer now. The recalculations faster, more internalized. The system was adapting. She turned to me afterward, her expression thoughtful. "They are learning," she said. "So are you," I replied. She paused. "Yes." That pause mattered. We walked through the inner gardens, where water followed paths that allowed deviation without chaos. She stopped near a low bridge and looked out over the controlled flow. "My mother believes power endures when it is predictable," she said. "I believe it endures when it is accountable." "And I'm the reminder," I said. "Yes," she replied. "Not of weakness, of consequence." I considered that. "You know this doesn't make me safe." She looked at me then fully. "No," she said, "but it makes you necessary." That was not comfort. It was truth. The queen summoned us one final time at the close of the cycle. Not to the throne hall, but to a smaller chamber overlooking the stars directly, no filters, no projections. Just space, raw and vast. "You have altered the alignment," the queen said, her gaze fixed outward. "Not dramatically, but decisively." I waited. "My daughter will rule with friction," she continued. "That will invite resistance." The princess stood tall beside me, unflinching. The queen turned at last, her eyes meeting mine. "You will remain," she said. Not as a request, as recognition. I inclined my head, not in submission but in acceptance. As we left the chamber, the princess slowed her pace. "You could still leave," she said quietly. "At any time." "I know," I replied, "and yet—" I thought of the conduit corridor, the unnoticed choice, the silence that followed. "Yet," I said, "this feels correct." She nodded. "Then stand." I did, not as a consort, not as a symbol, not as a hero, but as a human presence in a system that had learned, slowly, reluctantly, that power endured longer when someone was willing to pause it. The stars beyond the palace did not flare or realign visibly. They continued their distant burn, steady and indifferent, but somewhere between them decisions were being made more carefully, and that was enough. The change did not announce itself. No banners were raised. No declarations carved into stone or broadcast across systems. If anyone expected a clear moment where history turned, they were disappointed. The palace continued to function as it always had, measured, disciplined, deliberate. Councils met, fleets moved, trade corridors opened and closed according to schedules that looked unchanged to anyone skimming reports from a distance. Only those who lived inside the machinery noticed the difference. It appeared first as hesitation, not confusion, hesitation with intent. A pause inserted where certainty used to rush forward. I felt it each time we entered a chamber together. Conversations adjusted their cadence. Arguments softened at the edges. People began to explain themselves without being asked. At first they did it for her. Later they did it because they could not stop. The princess, no, the queen-in-waiting, though no one spoke the title aloud, adapted quickly to this new gravity. She did not resist the friction I introduced, nor did she lean on it excessively. When decisions demanded speed, she acted. When they demanded care, she waited. And when she waited visibly, making delay a choice rather than a weakness. I learned when to speak and when to remain still. That skill took longer. Silence, I discovered, was not the absence of contribution. It was its own form of pressure. When I stayed quiet, others filled the space, often revealing assumptions they had never bothered to examine before. When I spoke, it was usually with a question, simple, direct, impossible to dismiss without exposing something fragile beneath it. Why now? Why this cost? Who benefits if we are wrong? I did not offer alternatives. I did not propose solutions. That was never my role. I existed to make certainty uncomfortable. One evening, after a particularly long session that ended without resolution, the queen-in-waiting joined me on a high terrace overlooking open space. No glass, no railings, just a controlled field holding atmosphere in place while stars burned beyond it, uncaring and constant. "They are beginning to resent you," she said, not accusingly. "I assumed that would happen," I replied. "Yes," she said, "earlier than I expected." I smiled faintly. "I'll take that as a compliment." She studied me for a moment. "You are not afraid." "I am," I said, "just not of them." Her long ears shifted slightly, a subtle expression I had learned to recognize as interest. "Then what do you fear?" I considered the question honestly. "Becoming decorative," I said. "Being kept because I look like restraint, instead of because I create it." She turned back toward the stars. "That will not happen." "You can't guarantee that." "No," she agreed, "but I can respond when it tries." We stood in silence, the kind that did not need to be filled. Over time, I noticed that her silences had changed. They were no longer solitary. They included me not as support but as reference. That mattered. The queen, the mother, continued to observe from a distance that never quite became absence. When she spoke, it was usually to others, but her gaze often found me at the end of those moments, measuring not my reaction but the system's. Once, after a particularly delicate negotiation resolved without incident, she addressed me directly. "You have slowed us," she said. "Yes," I replied. "You have prevented several conflicts," she continued. "Yes." She studied me. "And you have created new tensions." "I expected that," I said. A pause. "Good," she said. "So did I." That was the closest thing to approval she ever offered. Time passed, enough that routines formed. Enough that my presence stopped being remarked upon aloud. Enough that people stopped asking what would happen if I left, and began adjusting as if I might not. One cycle, as we prepared to enter a council chamber, the queen-in-waiting paused. "You could step away now," she said quietly. "The alignment would hold." "For how long?" I asked. She considered. "Longer than it would have before you arrived." "That's not an answer," I said. "No," she replied. "It's an invitation." I looked at the doors ahead of us, at the familiar weight of attention waiting beyond them. I thought of the life I might have returned to, simpler, smaller, less visible. I thought of the conduit corridor, the unremarkable choice, the moment where expectation had not yet entered the equation. "I'll stay," I said. She nodded once. No gratitude, no ceremony, just acceptance. When we entered the chamber, the court adjusted as it always did now, quietly, unconsciously, inevitably. The system had learned, or was learning. Either way, it no longer rushed towards certainty without acknowledging the cost. I stood beside her, not because I was ordered to, not because I was bound to her fate, but because presence, I had learned, was sometimes the most enduring form of influence. Beyond the palace, beyond the systems and the borders and the careful language of power, the stars continued their distant burn. They did not care who ruled or how wisely. They did not reward restraint or punish haste. But between them, between decisions and consequences, space had been made. And in that space, for now, balance held.